Continuing the Mysterious Stranger by Mark Twain. I should not be able to make anyone understand how exciting it all was. You know that kind of quiver that trembles around through you when you are seeing something so strange and enchanting and wonderful that it is just a fearful joy to be alive and look at it. And you know how you gaze, and your lips turn dry, and your breath comes short, but you wouldn't be anywhere but there, not for the world. I was bursting to ask one question. I had it on my tongue's end, and could hardly hold it back, but I was ashamed to ask it. It might be a rudeness. Satan set an ox down that he had been making, and smiled up at me and said, "It wouldn't be a rudeness, and I should forgive it if it was. Have I seen him millions of times? From the time that I was a little child, 1,000 years old, I was his second favorite amongst the nursery angels of our blood and lineage, to use a human phrase. Yes, from that time until the fall, 8,000 years, measured as you count time. 8,000? Yes." He turned to Sepeth and went on as if answering something that was in Sepeth's mind. "Why, naturally I look like a boy, for that is what I am. With us, what you call time is a spacious thing. It takes a long stretch of it to grow an angel to full age." There was a question in my mind, and he turned to me and answered it. "I am 16,000 years old, counting as you count." Then he turned to Nikolaus and said, "No, the fall did not affect me, nor the rest of the relationship. It was only he that I was named for, who ate of the fruit of the tree, and then beguiled the man and the woman with it. For others are still ignorant of sin. We are not able to commit it. We are without blemish, and shall abide in that estate always. We." Two of the little workmen were quarreling, and in buzzing little bumblebee voices, they were cursing and swearing at each other. Now came blows and blood. Then they locked themselves together in a life and death struggle. Satan reached out his hand and crushed the life out of them with his fingers, threw them away, wiped the red from his fingers on his handkerchief, and went on talking where he had left off. We cannot do wrong, neither have we any disposition to do it, for we do not know what it is. It seemed a strange speech in the circumstances, but we barely noticed that. We were so shocked and grieved at the wanton murder he had committed, for murder it was, that was its true name, and it was without palliation or excuse, for the men had not wronged him in any way. It made us miserable, for we loved him, and had thought him so noble and beautiful and gracious, and had honestly believed he was an angel. And to have him do this cruel thing, it lowered him so, and we had such pride in him. He went right on, talking just as if nothing had happened, telling about his travels, and the interesting things he had seen in the big worlds of our solar system, and of other solar systems far away in the remoteness of space, and about the custom of immortals that inhabit them, somehow fascinating us, enchanting us, charming us in spite of the pitiful scene that was now under our eyes, for the wives of the little dead men had found the crushed and shapeless bodies and were crying over them, and sobbing and lamenting, and a priest was kneeling there with his hands crossed upon his breast, praying, and crowds of pitying friends were massed about them, reverently uncovered, with their bare heads bowed, and many with tears running down, a scene which Satan paid no attention to until the small noise of the weeping and praying began to annoy him. Then he reached out and took the heavy board seat out of our swing and brought it down and mashed all those people into the earth just as if they had been flies, and went on talking just the same. An angel. And kill a priest, an angel who did not know how to do wrong, and yet destroys in cold blood hundreds of helpless, poor men and women who had never done him any harm. It made us sick to see that awful deed, and to think that none of those poor creatures was prepared except the priest, for none of them had ever heard a mass or seen a church, and we were witnesses. Well, obviously, if they're crying, they know what death is, but we had seen these murders done, and it was our duty to tell and let the law take its course. But he went on talking right along, and worked his enchantments upon us again with that fatal music of his voice. He made us forget everything. We could only listen to him, and love him, and be his slaves, to do with us as he would. He made us drink with the joy of being with him, and of looking into the heaven of his eyes, and of the feeling of ecstasy that thrilled along our veins from the touch of his hand. Now, sometimes you can't do anything about stuff, but does that mean that it's not your business, you could say? Yeah, you could tell of it, that's that sort of thing, but some people take it further into an indifference. But an indifference of survival, you don't have to go to that point of indifference for survival. You can set it aside, per se. Okay, chapter 3. The stranger had seen everything. He had been everywhere. He knew everything, and he forgot nothing. What another must study, he learned at a glance. There were no difficulties for him, and he made things live before you. When he told about them, he saw the world make. He saw Adam created. He saw Samson surge against the pillars. That relates to some other myths. And bring the temple down in ruins about him. He saw Khazar's death. He told of the daily life in heaven. He had seen the damned writhing in the red waves of hell, and he made us see all these things. And it was as if we were on the spot, looking at them with our own eyes, and we felt them too. But there was no sign that they were anything to him beyond mere entertainments. Those visions of hell, those poor babes and women and girls and lads and men shrieking and supplicating in anguish, why? We could hardly bear it, but he was as bland about it as if it had been so many imitation rats in an artificial fire. And always when he was talking about men and women here on earth and their doings, even their grandest and sublimest, we were secretly ashamed, for his manner showed that to him they and their doings were of paltry poor consequence. Often you would think he was talking about flies, if you didn't know. Once he even said, in so many words, that our people down here were quite interesting to him, notwithstanding they were so dull and ignorant and trivial and conceited, and so diseased and rickety, and such a shabby, poor, worthless lot all around. He said it in a quite matter-of-course way, and without bitterness, just as a person might talk about bricks, or manure, or any other thing that was of no consequence, and hadn't feelings. I could see he meant no offense, but in my thoughts I set it down as not very good manners. Manners, he said? Why is it merely the truth? Why, it is merely the truth, and truth is good manners. Manners are a fiction. The castle is done. Do you like it? Anyone would have been obliged to like it. It was lovely to look at. It was so shapely and fine, and so cunningly perfect in all its particulars, even to the little flags waving from the turrets. Satan said, we must put the artillery in place now, and station the halberdiers, and display the cavalry. Our men and horses were a spectacle to see. They were so little like what they were intended for, of course, we had no art in making such things. Satan, said they, were the worst he had seen, and when he touched them and made them alive, it was just ridiculous the way they acted on account of their legs, not being of uniform lengths. They reeled and sprawled around as if they were drunk, and endangered everybody's lives around them, and finally fell over and lay helpless and kicking. Imagine how it's going to be with Anyways, I was just thinking about drunk driving, but it made us all laugh, though it was a shameful thing to see. The guns were charged with dirt to fire a salute, but they were so crooked and so badly made that they all burst when they went off, and killed some of the gunners and crippled the others. Satan said we would have a storm now, and an earthquake, if we liked, but we must stand off a piece, out of danger. We wanted to call the people away too, but he said, never mind them. They were of no consequence, and we could make more some time or other if we needed them. A small storm cloud began to settle down black over the castle, and the miniature lightning and thunder began to play, and the ground to quiver, and the wind to pipe and wheeze, and the rain to fall, and all the people flocked into the castle for shelter. The clouds settled down blacker and blacker, and one could see the castle only dimly through it, and the lightning blazed out flash upon flash, and pierced the castle, and set it on fire. The flames shone out, red and fierce, through the cloud, and the people came flying out, shrieking, but Satan brushed them back, paying no attention to our begging and crying and imploring. And in the midst of the howling of the wind and falling of the thunder, the magazine blew up, and the earthquake rent the ground wide, and the castle's wreck and ruin tumbled into the chasm, which swallowed it from sight, and closed upon it. And with all that innocent life, not one of the 500 poor creatures escaping. Our hearts were broken. We could not keep from crying. Don't cry, Satan said. They were of no value, but they are gone to hell. Oh, it is no matter. We can make plenty more. It was of no use to try to move him. Evidently he was wholly without feeling, and could not understand. He was full of bubbly spirits, and as gay as if this were a wedding instead of a fiendish massacre, and he was bent on making us feel as he did, and of course his magic accomplished his desire. It was no trouble to him, and he did whatever he pleased with us. In a little while we were dancing on that grave, and he was playing to us on a strange sweet instrument which he took out of his pocket, and the music. But there is no music like that, unless perhaps in heaven. And that was where he brought it from, he said. Where's that passage in Ezekiel about Satan being the lead musician, It made one mad for pleasure, and we could not take our eyes from him. And the looks that went out of our eyes came from our hearts, and their dumb speech was worship. He brought the dance from heaven too, and the bliss of paradise was in it. Presently, he said he must go away on an errand, but we could not bear the thought of it, and clung to him, and pleaded with him to stay, and that pleased him, and he said so, and said he would not go yet, but would wait a little while, and we would sit down and talk a few minutes longer, and he told us Satan was only his real name, and he was known by it to us alone. But he had chosen another one to be called by in the presence of others, just a common one, just as people have. Philip Trom. It sounded so odd and mean for such a being, but it was his decision, and we said nothing. His decision was sufficient. We had seen wonders this day, and my thoughts began to run on the pleasure it would be to tell them when I got home. But he noticed those thoughts and said, "No, all these matters are a secret among us four. I do not mind your trying to tell them if you like, but I will protect your tongues, and nothing of the secret will escape from them." It was a disappointment, but it couldn't be helped, and it cost us a sigh or two. We talked pleasantly along, and he was always reading our thoughts and responding to them, and it seemed to me that this was the most wonderful of all things. he did, but he interrupted my musings and said, "No, it would be wonderful for you, but it is not wonderful for me. I'm not limited like you. I'm not subject to human conditions. I can measure and understand your human weaknesses, for I have studied them, but I have none of them. My flesh is not real, although it would seem firm to your touch. My clothes are not real. I am a spirit. Father Peter is coming." We looked around, but did not see anyone. "He is not in sight yet, but you will see him presently." "Do you know him, Satan?" "No." "Won't you talk with him when he comes?" "He is not ignorant and dull like us." "And he would like so to talk with you. Will you?" "Another time, yes, but not now. I must go on my errand after a little." "There he is now. You can see him. Still, sit still, and don't say anything." We looked up and saw Father Peter approaching through the chestnuts. We three were sitting together in the grass, and Satan sat in front of us in the path. Father Peter came slowly along with his head down, thinking, and stopped within a couple of yards of us, and took off his hat, and got out of his silk handkerchief, and stood there, mopping his face, and looking as if he was going to speak to us, but he didn't. Presently he mustered, "I can't think what brought me here. It seems as if I were in my study a minute ago, but I suppose I have been dreaming along for an hour and have come all this stretch without noticing. For I am not myself in these troubled days." And then he went mumbling along to himself, and walked straight through Satan, just as if nothing were there, and made us catch our breath to see it. We had the impulse to cry out, the way you nearly always do when a startling thing happens, but something mysteriously restrained us, and we remained quiet, only breathing fast. Then the trees hid Father Peter after a little, and Satan said, "It is as I told you, I am only a spirit." "Yes, one perceives it now," said Nicolaus, "but we are not spirits. It is plain he did not see you." But were we invisible too? He looked at us, but did not seem to see us. No, none of us was visible to him, for I wished it so. It seemed almost too good to be true, that we were actually seeing these romantic and wonderful things, that it was not a dream, and there he sat, looking just like anybody, so natural and simple and charming, and chatting along again, the same as ever, and, well, words can't make you understand what we felt. It was an ecstasy, and an ecstasy is a thing that will not go into words. It feels like music, and one cannot tell about music so that another person can get the feeling of it. He was back in the old ages once more now, and making them live before us. He had seen so much, so much. It was just a wonder to look at him, and to try to think how it must seem to have such an experience behind one. But it made you seem sorrowfully trivial, and the creature of a day, and such a short and paltry day, too. And he didn't say anything to raise up your drooping pride. No, not a word. He always spoke of men in the same old indifferent way, just as one speaks of bricks and manure piles and such things. You could see that they were of no consequence to him, one way or the other. He didn't mean to hurt us. You could see that, just as we don't mean to insult a brick when we disparage it. A brick's emotions are nothing to us. It never occurs to us to think whether it has any or not. Well, I believe, in a sense, in animism, that there's a spirit, and I'm not talking about that all these things are divine or anything like that. I mean that, there's a witnessing, a spiritual witnessing behind the physical matter. And the different sections of physical matter, have their individual spirit, you could say. Like there's the earth's spirit. Anyways. Once, when he was munching the most illustrious kings and conquerors and poets and prophets and pirates and beggars together, just a brick pile, I was shamed into putting in a word for man, and asked him why he made so much difference between man and himself. He had to struggle with that a moment. He did not seem to understand how I could ask such a strange question. Then he said, "The difference between man and me the difference between a mortal and an immortal, between a cloud and a spirit. He picked up a wood louse that was creeping along a place of bark. What is the difference between Caesar and this? I said, one cannot compare things which, by their nature and their interval between them, are not comparable. You have answered your own question, he said. I will expand it. Man is made of dirt. I saw him made. I am not made of dirt. Man is a museum of diseases, a home of impurities. He comes today and is gone tomorrow. He begins as dirt and departs as stench. I am of the aristocracy of the imperishables. The jinn have respite. And man has the moral sense, you understand. He has the moral sense. That would seem to be difference enough between us, all by itself. He stopped there, as if that settled the matter. I was sorry, for at that time I had but a dim idea of what the moral sense was. I merely knew that we were proud of having it, and when he talked like that about it, it wounded me, and I felt as a girl feels who thinks her dearest finery is being admired and then overhears strangers making fun of it. For a while we were all silent, and I, for one, was depressed. Then Satan began to chat again, and as soon as he was sparkling along in such a cheerful and vivacious vein that my spirits rose once more, he told some very cunning things that put us in a gale of laughter. And when he was telling about the time that Samson tied the torches to the foxes' tails and set them loose in the Philistines' corn, and Samson sitting on the fence, slapping his thighs and laughing, with tears running down his cheeks, and lost his balance and fell off the fence, the memory of that picture got him laughing too, and we did have a most lovely and jolly time. By and by, he said, I am going on my errand now. Don't, we all said, don't go. Stay with us. You won't come back. Yes, I will. I give you my word. When? Tonight? Say when. It won't be long. You will see. We like you, and I like you. And as a proof of it, I will show you something fine to see. Usually when I go, I merely vanish. But now I will dissolve myself and let you see me do it. He stood up, and it was quickly finished. He thinned away and thinned away until he was a soap bubble, except that he kept his shape. You could see the bushes through him as clearly as you see through a soap bubble, and all over him played and flashed the delicate, iridescent colors of the bubble, and along with them was that thing shaped like a window sash, which you always see on the globe of the bubble. You have seen a bubble strike the carpet and lightly bound along 2 or 3 times before it bursts. He did that. He sprang, touched the grass, bounded, floated along, touched again, and so on, and presently exploded, puff, and in his place was vacancy. He was a strange and beautiful thing to see. We did not say anything, but sat, wondering, and dreaming, and blinking, and finally Seppe roused up and said, mournfully sighing, I suppose none of it has happened. Nikolaus sighed and said about the same. I was miserable to hear them say it, for it was the same cold fear that was in my own mind. Then we saw poor old Father Peter wandering along back, with his head bent down, searching the ground, and he was pretty close to us, and he looked up and saw us and said, How long have you been here, boys? A little while, Father. Maybe you can help me. Did he come up by the path? Yes, Father. That is good. I came the same way. I have lost my wallet, but there wasn't much in it, but a very little is much to me, for it was all I had. I suppose you haven't seen anything of it. No, Father, but we will help you hunt. It is what I was going to ask you. Why, here it is. We hadn't noticed it, yet there it lay, right where Satan stood when he began to melt. If he didn't melt, and it wasn't a delusion, Father Peter picked it up and looked very much surprised. It is mine, he said, but not the contents. This is flat. Mine was flat. This is fat. Mine was flat. Mine was light. This is heavy. He opened it. It was stuffed as full as it could hold with gold coins. He let us gaze our fill, And of course we did gaze, for we had never seen so much money at one time before. All our mouths came open to say it. Satan did it, but nothing came out. There it was, you see. We couldn't tell what Satan didn't want told. He had said so himself. Boys, did you do this? It made us laugh, and it made him laugh too, as soon as he thought what a foolish question it was. Who has been here? Our mouths came to answer, but stood for a moment, because we couldn't say nobody, for it wouldn't be true, and the right word didn't seem to come. Then I thought of the right one, and said it. Not a human being. That is so, said the others, and let their mouths go shut. It is not so, said Father Peter, and looked at us very severely. I came by here a while ago, and there was no one here. But that is nothing. Someone has been here since. I don't mean to say that the person didn't pass here before you came, and I don't mean to say you saw him, but someone did pass, and I know, on your honor, you saw no one. Not a human being. That is sufficient. I know you are telling me the truth. He began to count the money on the path, we on our knees, eagerly helping to stack it in little piles. It's 1,100 ducats odd, he said. Oh dear, if it were only mine, and I need it so. And his voice broke and his lips quivered. It is yours, sir, we all cried out at once, every heller. No, it isn't mine. Only 4 ducats are mine. The rest? He fell to dreaming, poor old soul, and caressing some of the coins in his hands, and forgot where he was, sitting there on his heels with his old gray head bare. It was pitiful to see. No, he said, waking up, it isn't mine. I can't account for it. I think some enemy. It must be a trap. Now, somebody donates to a poor person, it's not a trap. It's a favor they do to themselves, really. Nicolaus said, Father Peter, with the exception of the astrologer, you haven't a real enemy in the village. Nor Margaret, either, and not even a half-enemy that's rich enough to chance 1,100 ducats to do you a mean turn. I'll ask you if that's so or not. He couldn't get around that argument, and it cheered him up. But it isn't mine, you see. It isn't mine, in any case. He said it in a wistful way, like a person that wouldn't be sorry, but glad if anybody would contradict him. It is yours, Father Peter, and we are witnesses to it. Aren't we, boys? Yes, we are, and we'll stand by it too. Bless your hearts. You do almost persuade me. You do indeed. If I had only 100-odd ducats of it. The house is mortgaged for it, and we've no home for our heads if we don't pay tomorrow. And that 4 ducats is all we've got in the... It's yours, every bit of it, and you've got to take it, and we are bail that it's all right. Aren't we, Theodore? Aren't we, Seppi? We too said, and Nicolaus stuffed the money back into the shabby old wallet and made the owner take it. So, he said he would use 200 of it, for his house was good enough security for that, and would put the rest at interest until the rightful owner came for it. And on our side, we must sign a paper showing how he got the money, a paper to show to the villagers as proof that he had not got it out of his troubles dishonestly. And, well, putting it at interest is definitely against the biblical way, right? Chapter 4. It made immense talk next day when Father Peter paid Simon Isaacs in gold and left the rest of the money with him at interest. Also, there was a pleasant change. Many people called at the house to congratulate him, and a number of cool old friends became kind and friendly again, and to top all, Margaret was invited to a party. And there was no mystery. Father Peter told the whole circumstance just as it happened, and he said he could not account for it, only that it was the plain hand of Providence, so far as he could see. 1 or 2 shook their heads and said privately it looked more like the hand of Satan, and really that seemed a surprisingly good guess for ignorant people like that. Some came slyly buzzing around and tried to coax us boys to come out and tell the truth, and promised they wouldn't ever tell, but only wanted to know for their own satisfaction because the whole thing was so curious. They even wanted to buy the secret and pay money for it, and if we could have invented something that would answer, but we couldn't. We hadn't the ingenuity, so we had to let the chance go by, and it was a pity. We carried that secret around without any trouble, but the other one, the big one, the splendid one, burned the very vitals of us. It was so hot to get out, and we so hot to let it out, and astonish people with it, but we had to keep it in. In fact, it kept itself in. Satan said it would, and it did. We went off every day and got to ourselves in the woods so that we could talk about Satan, and really that it was the only subject we thought of or cared anything about, and day and night we watched for him and hoped he would come, and we got more and more impatient all the time. We hadn't any interest in the other boys anymore, and wouldn't take part in their games and enterprises. They seemed so tame after Satan, and their doings so trifling and commonplace after his adventures in antiquity, and the constellations, and his miracles, and the meltings and explosions, and all that. During the first day, we were in a state of anxiety on account of one thing, and we kept going to Father Peter's house on one pretext or another to keep track of it. That was the gold coin. We were afraid it would crumble and turn to dust like fairy money. If it did, but it didn't. At the end of the day, no complaint had been made about it. So after that, we were satisfied that it was real gold and dropped the anxiety out of our minds. There was a question which we wanted to ask Father Peter, and finally we went there the second evening, a little diffidently, after drawing straws, and I asked it as casually as I could, though it did not sound as casual as I wanted because I didn't know how. "What is the moral sense, sir?" He looked down surprised over his great spectacles and said, "Why, it is the faculty which enables us to distinguish good from evil." It threw some light, but not a glare, and I was a little disappointed, to some degree embarrassed. He was waiting for me to go on, so, in default of anything else to say, I asked, "Is it valuable?" "Valuable? Heavens, lad, it is the one thing that lifts man above the beasts that perish and makes him heir to immortality." This, it did not remind me of anything further to say, so I got out with the other boys, and we went away with that indefinite sense you have often had of being filled but not fatted. They wanted me to explain, but I was tired. We passed out through the parlor, and there was Margaret at the spinet, teaching Mary Luger. So one of the deserting pupils was back, and an influential one too. The others would follow. Margaret jumped up and ran and thanked us again. With tears in her eyes, this was the third time for saving her and her uncle from being turned into the street, and we told her again we hadn't done it, but that was her way. She couldn't be grateful. She never could be grateful enough for anything a person did for her, so we let her have her say, and as we passed through the garden, there was Wilhelm Meidling sitting there waiting for it was getting toward the edge of the evening, and he would be asking Margaret to take a walk along the river with him when she was done with the lesson. He was a young lawyer and succeeding fairly well and working his way little by little. He was very fond of Margaret, and she of him. He had not deserted along with the others, but had stood his ground all through. His faithfulness was not lost on Margaret and her uncle. He hadn't so very much talent, but he was handsome and good, and these are a kind of talents themselves, and help along. He asked us how the lesson was getting along, and we told him it was about done, and maybe it was so, but we didn't know anything about it, but we judged it would please him, and it did. It didn't cost us anything. And, I guess that's the end of chapter 4, and we'll get to chapter 5 and, 6. Maybe just chapter 5 in the next program. But one of the things about moral sense, in reference to Satan, of course, is that Satan doesn't, whether it's negative or positive, rather than some horror movie thing. Anything not done are done for Satan's sake. That's Satanism. That's, in a way, so it's indifferent and that sort of thing. Or, at the very least, Satan tries to get to people at the point where they're just making things secular. And if things are secular, they've lost their spiritual value. Oh, sure, I guess we get rewarded for some good and truth here and there, but it virtually takes all the strength out of it, doesn't it? And, of course, the mortal sense, even though they will have their death, you could say, too, but the jinn or the daemon, or however you're going to, the davas or the asuras or whatever you're going to call the fairies or the fire beings or something, their moral sense, their mortal sense is not the sort of thing that us humans have. And of course, they don't have the human experience.